So Autopilot is essentially a LP aggregator. And what it does, it's monitoring and autonomously routing liquidity across a set of pools. And it does so through what we call Autopools. And these Autopools that you've seen on our website and provide liquidity to, they are ERC-466 vaults, and are going to be configured with several different pools as destinations. So this remains fully composable across DeFi, and it has no withdrawal delays. You can always come in, redeem your assets, and get your tokens back.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's show spotlights Tokemak Autopilot. In this episode, we review the newly launched Tokemak Autopools, including how they simplify liquidity provisions, how they autonomously rebalance to earn the best yields, and how these new ETH Autopools compare to other yield products on the market. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge Podcast possible. Introducing REDSTONE, the fastest growing oracle for DeFi. REDSTONE is the leading oracle for liquid staking and restaking assets, supporting over 60 chains with both the push and pull models. REDSTONE protects more than $3 billion of total value locked and is trusted by more than 100 clients, including the biggest protocols in DeFi, such as Pendle, Venus, EtherFi, and Athena. The unique modular design of REDSTONE makes their price feeds available cross-chain, including EVM, non-EVM, roll-up networks, and all types of app chains. REDSTONE aims to bring the industry forward by supporting upcoming Bitcoin staking tokens and continues to be the #1 oracle provider for liquid staking and restaking tokens. Soon the team will unveil the highly anticipated REDSTONE token to decentralize the protocol. Learn why Nomadic and I rely on REDSTONE for our favorite DeFi apps at REDSTONE.finance and join the REDSTONE expedition today. Power up your portfolio by borrowing, lending, and multiplying your favorite assets, made safe and easy by the industry-leading automation tools at SUMMER.FI. SUMMER.FI offers a curated DeFi experience to access the highest quality protocols and strategies. Discover new earn strategies for your portfolio in a user-friendly app designed to filter based on the tokens you hold, the networks you transact on, the protocols you trust, and the highest available yields. Learn more today at SUMMER.FI, the best place to borrow and earn in DeFi. Discover MERLIN Chain, the cutting-edge Bitcoin Layer 2, trusted with over $2 billion in total value locked. MERLIN revolutionizes Bitcoin by unlocking its true potential with native L1 assets, lightning-fast transactions, and ultra-low fees on an EVM-compatible network. Elevate your Bitcoin experience with MERLIN Chain today at merlinchain.io. All right, let's introduce two core contributors from Tokemak, Carson and Manuel. Welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having us, guys. Excited to talk Autopilot today.
Recently, I wrote a tutorial on Autopools. And so this is a new product from Tokemak. I feel like this is delivering on the original vision that drew us all into Tokemak. But why don't we talk a little bit more about the background of Tokemak? So Carson, maybe you can kick us off there. I guess tell us about the origins of Tokemak as a protocol.
Sure. So Tokemak V1 was really all centered around the concept of liquidity as bandwidth. So in a world where we were transitioning from Web 2, where data flowed around, to Web 3, where value flowed around, the role of liquidity really served sort of as bandwidth on the network. So we were focused, we started on the trading side. We were providing liquidity to various decentralized exchanges. And we asked the question of how can we sort of abstract away from a company or a group of individuals providing liquidity to actually being a decentralized liquidity provider that ran from a smart contract. And that's how Tokemak V1 was born.
Carson, what would you say, looking back, what did you get right with Tokemak V1? What do you think you got wrong? I guess ultimately, what were the lessons that you've learned from that?
Absolutely. So there's a lot we got right, a lot we got wrong with V1. I think first, the general concept of the importance of liquidity in the Web3 and DeFi space, that was absolutely right. You're going to see that a lot of that permeates our new product, Autopilot, that we're going to be talking about shortly. I think some of the things that we have adjusted going into Autopilot, our V2, some of the things we learned from V1. First, it's all when you look at liquidity in a market, it's really important that liquidity goes to wherever it's most needed and wherever it can be most efficiently deployed. In V1, we have the token holders basically as liquidity directors, and what we learned is that's not necessarily the optimal way to deploy liquidity. A group of token holders doesn't necessarily know where and how liquidity should be deployed most effectively. So as we go to V2, it's all about how do we automate liquidity. And where can liquidity go after the most attractive yields? Where can it be deployed most effectively across the ecosystem? Second, I think was really we took a hard look at market sizing. So in V1, we were focused on governance tokens, which has a much smaller addressable market by kind of focusing on projects and governance tokens versus being more focused on LPs, which we're doing with V2 with Autopilot. There we're going after first ETH holders, but going forward, stable coins, Bitcoin variants, etc. So we're making sure that we have a very large addressable market with Tokemak V2 Autopilot. Third, I would say we learned that you have to be very intelligent about incentives. Tokemak V1, and I would say most of DeFi at that vintage, threw out too much incentives, was sort of operating in a non-sustainable inflationary manner. And so that's something going forward, it's all about how do you create a sustainable protocol from the beginning that provides real value to the users, in this case, the LPs.
Yeah, well said. Maybe Manuel, you can kind of comment on the problem statement that you realized with manual LPing. I mean, it's not always the easiest thing. And then, you kind of have to monitor your LP position and maybe move it. You got to worry about things like IL. So I know, privately, you and I have been kind of talking about this a lot, and you've, I think, articulated this problem statement very well. So maybe just, address kind of what Autopilot is solving for here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm the prototype user for Autopilot. I was facing this myself. And, the current status quo, whenever you provide liquidity to any given pool, is that the LP comes in with assets, deposits funds into a pool, and this liquidity becomes isolated and insensitive to changes in market rates until manual intervention occurs. So the question that we asked ourselves was, how can we connect liquidity across several pools? And this is particularly important for correlated trading pairs, like, for example, ETH-LST, ETH-LRT, and stablecoin pools. So the challenges that manual LPs will face while providing liquidity to these pools are things like, for example, having to monitor a very large option set of pools, having to deal with APR variance, meaning that once you enter a pool, you are looking at this APR in a snapshot in time. But you know that these APRs are going to change. And you need to keep on rebalancing your liquidity, otherwise you're going to start to underperform market rates. Then you also need to account for the different AMM models, meaning that a stable swap pool on curve is going to behave absolutely differently from a concentrated liquidity gyroscope ECLP pool. And then finally, each time that you make a decision to just move liquidity between pool A and pool B, you are paying costs. And these costs are paid basically in the form of gas, slippage, and trading fees. So if you are not making the right choices, instead of chasing the highest yields and optimizing your performance, you're actually incurring NAV decay. So you're actually losing value in your net portfolio. So the question that we asked ourselves was, how can we abstract all of these issues and just provide to LPs a new way to provide liquidity that is fully automated? And that's the answer that we've got to. It's Autopilot.
Maybe, Manuel, you can go a bit further with what is the difference between Autopilot and Autopools? So I'm kind of using those interchangeably. If you go to the Tokemak app, the three products that stood out for me are these Autopools, where I can deposit ETH or like an LRT and start to automate some of my yield earnings. So what's the difference between those two terms?
Happy to take it. So think about Autopilot as the overarching system, right? And I'll briefly explain what Autopilot is and then go through all of these different components. So Autopilot is essentially an LP aggregator. And what it does, it's monitoring and autonomously routing liquidity across a set of pools. And it does so through what we call autopools. And these autopools that you've seen on our website and provide liquidity to, they are ERC-4626 vaults, and are going to be configured with several different pools as destinations. So whenever an LP comes into Tokemak and he sees available autopools, the LP, by depositing the base asset, which in this case is ETH for this first set of autopools, is acknowledging and opting into all of the underlying constituents, which can be, for example, pulls across, curve, balancer, or whatever other AML we're integrating. And I think that assuming that autopools are this exquisite glue that just gives you one option set instead of providing liquidity to individual pool is the right way to think about it. In the user experience, for any autopool LP is very simple. It just comes in with a base asset. So for example, ETH, he gets back a receipt token, for example, Auto ETH, which is one of the available autopools that we currently have. And all of the underlying liquidity that is deposited within this autopool is going to just be autonomously rebalanced over time in order to ensure that LPs are optimally allocated. And the awesome thing is that the LP gets a receipt token back. So this remains fully composable across DeFi, and it has no withdrawal delays. You can always come in, redeem your assets, and get your tokens back.
What I think kind of draws me into this model for me is I think this creates a bit of a meritocracy in the system, because if you've created this tool that can essentially sniff out the best yields in DeFi, and then users know that behind the scenes, it's always automating and then continuously rebalancing itself and finding even better yields all the time, then you can kind of maybe actually live the dream of sitting passively in a position. Hopefully, I mean, that would be amazing. I want to also kind of break into more about what you're talking about with this ERC-4626 standard, because I think there's some superpowers there that maybe people might not even realize, but it being kind of this like liquid receipt token, my mind is always wandering to things like, okay, down the road, as this gets even more established, maybe even more lendiness to Tokemak V2, lending and borrowing platforms could come to you and be like, look, we want to allow these tokenized ERC-4626 positions to be able to be borrowed against. So can you kind of speak to maybe some of the other superpowers behind this, tokenized receipt token?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that you're touching on these DeFi integrations, because we're obviously on ongoing conversations with a lot of these groups. And the ERC-4626 standard is a standard for vaults that does not only improve security standards, but it's also going to imply that composability and ease of integrations is dramatically improved. And as I was mentioning, this receipt token represents a share over the autopool. So when the autopool LP gets this receipt token back, he's receiving a yield-bearing autopool share. And the awesome thing about having what we call LATs, which is a liquid auto token that represents the receipt token from the respective autopool, is that you are holding this token and using it across DeFi, while the underlying liquidity is still autonomously automated across the liquidity network. So the cool way to think about this is that it's a tokenization of a liquidity network that is backed by autonomous LP positions. And that's very powerful. Now you have capital efficiency that is just unprecedented, and you can find really cool use cases across DeFi. We're definitely exploring going into money markets. We've had conversations around this with several different players. I believe that the first DeFi integration that is going to be live is going to be the BAL ETH pool on Balancer. This is one of the collaborations that we're going to mention in a bit. But yeah, a lot of exciting things happening on the composability side, and all of this enabled thanks to the ERC-4626 standard.
And I'll just layer on top the ERC-4626 and how we've deployed it. I really see these things sort of as stacking. So you have liquid staking tokens, LSTs, you have liquid restaking token, LRTs, and then we have this new thing that we're launching, liquid auto tokens or LATs. So it's sort of like, you have ETH and you want yield, why not deploy into an auto pool, get back that liquid auto token? And now not only do you have a basket or a portfolio of LSTs and LRTs, but they're also optimally deployed across a liquidity network of DEXs. So now you're stacking not only those staking and restaking yields and points, but also the underlying trading fees, the underlying incentives for the pools, all autonomously rebalanced and optimized.
And this composability aspect that we were touching on, it was a very deliberate design choice. So there are a lot of choices that we had to make while designing our architecture. And I want to highlight that Autopilot is trustless. Autopilot has a fully on-chain verifiable strategy. And Autopilot made a big sacrifice to essentially ensure that anyone can withdraw funds immediately. Because without these immediate withdrawals, all of the composability stack that I would want to see on Autopools as a money Lego would essentially be rather useless. So focusing on immediate withdrawals is something that LPs are always asking about. It's like one of the first questions that we were getting over the past 1 week and a half or so. It was just, well, can I withdraw my funds at any time? Because I've deposited into a lot of protocols where everyone says that, it's fine, you can go out whenever you want, but then you are wrecked by whatever buffer they have in terms of withdrawal delays. And we have a design that also prioritizes smaller depositors. So there is what we call the idle buffer. And this idle buffer holds a de minimis amount of TVL that is supposed to satisfy smaller depositors that want to just come in and out. And given that one of these deployments is on mainnet, the first one, we wanted to make sure that the UX for smaller depositors was great. If you are a whale that is coming in and redeeming assets that go way beyond this idle buffer, the underlying LP positions are just going to be unwind, and the LP is going to still get his funds immediately.
Hey everyone, before we get back to the show, excited to tell you about a new omni-chain Bitcoin solution called FBTC, which has already surpassed $125 million in TVL and become the fastest growing BTCFi asset this summer. The FBTC Points Campaign Sparkle offers sustainable yields plus points and token airdrops from strategic partners such as Babylon, Mantle's new token Cook, and more. To learn more, visit fbtc.com/ongoing-campaign. And special thanks to FBTC for sponsoring us at the Edge Podcast. So given everything we've covered so far, I want to run through a few examples. As of this recording, there are 3 auto pools live. Each of them cater to ETH or like an LST, LRT basket. So I'm wondering, could you run us through just some examples of how do each of these auto pools work? Like what happens to autonomously rebalance and so forth?
Yeah, I can definitely start by touching on the system architecture. And it's going to be oversimplification, but you only need to focus on 4 core components. So the first component, it's the auto pool. And the auto pool, as I mentioned, it's a contract that has a ERC 4626 vault. It's only going to define the set of pools that are included. So when an LP comes in with assets, this is where it's going to deposit these funds. It's in the auto pool. Now you can imagine that this auto pool is pointing to basically the LP destinations that are integrated. So it can be, for example, 5 pools deployed across different DEXs. And this information about all of these pools needs to be made available on-chain so that our system knows how to rebalance. And this is done through what we call the stat system. So the stat system is going to be responsible for looking at signals like, for example, trading fees, incentives APR, ETH staking yield, etc., and providing them on-chain. And besides providing the signals on-chain, it's also going to do a lot of filtering and processing, because there are trading fees, for example, that are noisy signals and have to be heavily filtered. Now, the 2 other components that are going to answer the question around how does this whole thing fit together and rebalance, it's the solver and the strategy contract that backs the auto pool. So the solver is the off-chain component that is responsible for proposing rebalances to the auto pool. It basically says move funds from pool A to pool B. And how are these proposals of rebalances validated? Well, that's the responsibility of the strategy contract, which essentially acts as a gatekeeper that enforces on-chain conditions that ensure that for a proposed rebalance to be accepted, it needs to essentially lead to a better outcome for the autopool. And by placing these four components together, you have the autopools, defining the pools that are included in any option set, the stat system providing information on chain, the solver proposing rebalances to the autopool, and the strategy contract acting as a gatekeeper that enforces the rules that must be met for liquidity to be moved from pool A to pool B.
One other thing is, how often do rebalances happen, or how often is it at least looking to make a move?
Yeah, sure thing. So the rebalances are going to depend, obviously, on market rates. Because what Autopilot is doing, it's really just looking at all the constituents. And the way that it generates this outperformance is by capturing the variance across the various pools, right? So assuming, for example, that there is a very low variance across all of the constituent pools, you're going to see a lower frequency of rebalances versus a period where there is a lot of high volatility in APRs. And now it's probably a good point to touch on how we see these APRs, because a 10% on a curve pool is going to mean something widely different, for example, on a balancer pool. It's going to have different reward tokens associated with it. It can have a different underlying AMM model that implies that reserves are behaving differently and overall need to be accounted in a different manner. And what we have is something called the composite return metric that is essentially going to give a score to all of the pools integrated in an auto pool. And you can, for example, weight all of these components differently. So if your alpha is, for example, chasing the incentives APR, this weight might be much higher than a noisier signal, like, for example, the trading fees. And this is kind of the overarching thinking on how to score the different auto pools. And manual LPs, they always make, this wrong assumption of just comparing to front ends. And they see, okay, in this specific moment in time, Curve is offering me for the same pair 11%, and Balancer is offering me 8%, but they do not have a strong knowledge of what's going to be the predicted APR, nor the historic APRs. So humans are fundamentally flawed when it comes to make optimal decisions, and these are all aspects that Autopilot is going to account for, as I mentioned, in things like the signal processing and components of the strategy like the composite return metric.
One of my favorite parts of the system is its ability to take the volatility of the yields into account. So just because incentives or trading fees move around and a yield increases on a pool that we're not deployed in, we don't necessarily immediately jump over to that pool. Rather, we look at sort of historical volatility of those yields to see, hey, with the slippage and the fees associated with rebalancing into that pool, how long do we expect that deployment will pay back in terms of days? And that's an interesting parameter in the system. There's actually a self-learning component there that it acquires over time, which is really powerful and something that we can evolve into a much more advanced machine learning or AI framework as well.
Yeah, it's an adaptive rebalance constraint. And you can imagine that there is a step size associated with this, and it can tighten or loosen over time depending on these market conditions. And this is something that, again, manual LPs fail to realize, is that if you're exclusively trying to chase the highest yield in this current moment in time, you're going to incur a lot of NAV decay. You're going to burn your portfolio. And you think that you're, outperforming when in reality, you're damaging your own returns.
So guys, I have a few rapid fire questions. First off, what other types of ETH pools are you thinking of? And I guess maybe you could also give us a quick overview of, how you've thought about the existing, 3 pools that are already launched.
Before Manuel goes into some of the existing pools, I think just at a high level, we think of this in terms of the constituent pieces, whether those are LSTs, LRTs, mix. We look at the chain it's on, because right now we're on mainnet, but we'll be going multi-chain, multi-chain, and then ultimately cross-chain. And then also the venue or venues that we support in a given auto pool network. And Manuel can go deeper into all those with kind of our initial choices here.
Yeah, I will say that our largest expansion opportunity is to integrate, obviously, USD-denominated autopools. LPs seeking yield over USD, we all know that it's a huge addressable market, and it's a huge priority for us. The next deployment that we're going to have, it's going to be on Base, and we're also going to integrate new dexes, like, for example, Aerodrome. And what I would like to highlight is that Autopools are not just an instrument for LPs to have a new way to provide liquidity that is fully automated, but it's also a tool for protocols that want to streamline liquidity across their entire ecosystem, providing an easy entry point where users come in, they deposit a base asset, and then liquidity is just autonomously distributed throughout their ecosystem. To touch on the cross-chain component, the way that we're currently thinking about this, it's with a hub and spoke model. And basically what this model entails is that we can have a hub on L2, like, for example, Base. Users can come in and deposit and withdraw assets. And then we'll use ZK to pull data from all of the different chains, aggregate it in a coprocessor, provably submit this back to the hub, like Base. Emits one intent that basically says, move funds from chain A to chain B, and then obviously conduct the bridging. And what is interesting about this is that it's just an autopilot optimization over the top. So autopools are optimizing across different pools that are included, and then this optimization over the top is just optimizing across autopilot deployments on different chains. Same rationale, but it allows you to serve a market of LPs, which is the LP that is chain agnostic.
And then can you give us an overview of how do you think of auto pools comparing to other passive yield aggregation type products? Like if we were giving a sales pitch to like an investor and said, hey, here's why you should use auto pools over, other products that will allow you to aggregate yield in a very passive way.
So I'll start by saying that when you look at comparisons with yield aggregators, especially the static ones, they're focused on providing to LPs utility on a single pool. And our goal is to connect several pools of liquidity and basically add performance over the top by capturing the variance across all of these different pools, where liquidity can be rebalanced across. But furthermore, what I would like to highlight is that Autopilot's ultimately supposed to be a liquidity router, and a quick elevator pitch, it would be a 1 inch for LPs. That's really the endgame vision. There are a lot of features that we didn't cover, like, for example, permissionless autopools, where you basically allow LPs to come in, select the pools that they want to have included in an autopool, and deploy their own autopool in order to just have a tailored risk preference that can be very attractive to a lot of different external users, like, for example, risk managers, protocols that might want to streamline liquidity across their ecosystem, or individual users that just don't see their risk preferences expressed on available autopools and want to create their own individual deployment. So a curve factory but on Autopilot.
And I would add that comparing Autopilot to some of the more passive yield aggregators or yield compounders, most of those groups deploy into a single pool and just very simply sort of compound rewards. Within Autopilot, there's a much more advanced sort of decision tree going across the deployments throughout the liquidity network, and the compounding is just sort of the icing on the cake. So what those other protocols do really well is just like a small piece of the much broader Autopool innovation here that we're unleashing.
Catch the tide of the mainnet launch of Puffer Finance. Whether you're an Ethereum staker or an aspiring node operator, Puffer delivers the decentralization revolution with its cutting-edge technology. Start with just 2 ETH to unlock the potential of native liquid restaking and maximize your earnings. Join the movement now and anchor your stake at puffer.fi.
Also, guys, another form of yield that's kind of emerged this cycle is this points phenomenon. I'd be curious, maybe one of you can kind of take this on. How are points being accounted for in this new system? And is that actually something that is going back to people who are LPing in these Autopools?
Great question. We have a lot of demand, obviously, during the points farming mania. And a very helpful VC told me, well, can we aggregate over points? And, after thinking about this quickly, I was like, okay, we can look at yield marketplaces like, for example, Pendle. Look at the implied yields that they currently have for the assets and pools that are providing points to LPs. And what we basically do is using these implied yields as a soft signal that is also going to influence the rebalance decision. So for instance, if you go to our website, you're going to see 3 different Autopools currently live. AutoETH just focused on ETH LSTs, Auto LRT that is focused on LRTs, and you'll see that this one says that it accounts for points. So instead of just looking at the base yield as the only factor that is going to be important when conducting rebalance decisions, we're looking at the implied yields from Pendle to also add a boost to this base APR.
And then finally, guys, I'm curious just kind of like the security steps that you've undertaken to implement all this. I know it's been a long process. You had a guarded launch, but maybe just what can you say to people that would make them feel comfortable with entering these Autopools? Like, what sort of audit process have you gone through?
Yeah, we had a very extensive security review process. We had preliminary audits with Alborn. Then we conducted crowdsourced competitions with Sherlock with pretty sizable bounties. Then we conducted a formal verification with Certora to our strategy, which was also audited in a crowdsourced competition with Ads Finance. And then finally, we conducted a final full system audit with Accents that had 2 separate teams of security researchers going through our code. And this is a pretty unique approach that Accents came up with that we're very happy with. In addition to all of these past steps in terms of security review, we also have ongoing monitoring tools, like, for example, Hypernative, that provides real-time monitoring on our deployments. And in addition to that, we have 2 bug bounties live on both Immunify and Remedy.
We really take security seriously. So in addition to our guarded launch, which was live for a number of months, as Manuel said, we've covered formal verification, audits, crowd-based bug bounties, the guarded launch, and then also some monitoring tools both before and after launch on things like Hypernative, and also some AI machine learning attack vectors as well via something called Test Machine. And so we're really trying to throw every single thing that we can at Tokemak, and we feel very confident about where it's at.
Carson, Manuel, this is a great place for us to start to wrap up. So I want to remind our listeners that they should learn more about Tokemak by going to tokemak.xyz. They should follow Tokemak XYZ on X or Twitter, follow Liquidity Wizard, which is Carson's handle, and follow Archer_MD, which is Manuel's handle. All of that's in our show notes, so you can reference it there. Thank you both for coming on. This was great just to be able to dig in. I wrote up these tutorials recently, and the tutorials are very short because you just connect to your Ethereum mainnet wallet and you deposit. And in my example, I'm depositing ETH, so they're like single transactions. So the product speaks for itself. It's very easy to use, but what's powerful here is it's just helpful to understand how does Autopilot work? How do Autopools work? What are their capabilities for, protocols to even start to use to expand their own liquidity and work across all the different chains that you'll support here in the future. So anyways, guys, thanks for your time. Any final word for us on what we should look forward to next?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. If you have ETH and you want yield and you want a very simple process, go to tokemak.xyz. And also keep an eye out. There's going to be a whole lot more Autopools, both for ETH and beyond, coming in the near future.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please check out our link tree at edge_pod.